This is from the Free Press. Um, I thought I was saving trans kids. Now I'm blowing the whistle. There are more than 100 pediatric gender clinics across the US. I worked at one. What's happening to children is morally and medically appalling, by Jamie Reed. I'm a 42-year-old St. Louis native, a queer woman, a politically left of Bernie Sanders. My worldview has deeply shaped my career. I have spent my professional life providing counseling to vulnerable populations, children in foster care, sexual minorities, the poor. For almost 4 years, I worked at the Washington University School of Medicine Division of Infectious Diseases with teens and young adults who were HIV positive. Many of them were trans or otherwise gender nonconforming, and I could relate. Through childhood and adolescence, I did a lot of gender questioning myself. I'm now married to a trans man, and together we are raising my two biological children from a previous marriage and three foster children we hope to adopt. All that led me to a job in 2018 as a case manager at the Washington University Transgender Center at St. Louis Children's Hospital, which had been established a year earlier. The center's working assumption was that the earlier you treat kids with gender dysphoria, the more anguish you can prevent later on. This premise was shared by the center's doctors and therapists. Given their expertise, I assumed that abundant evidence backed this consensus. During the 4 years I worked at the clinic as a case manager, I was responsible for patient intake and oversight. Around 1,000 distressed young people came through to our doors. The majority of them received hormone prescriptions that can have life altering consequences, including sterility. I left the clinic in November of last year because I could no longer participate in what was happening there. By the time I departed, I was certain that the way the American medical system is treating these patients is the opposite of the promise we make to do no harm. Instead, we're permanently harming the vulnerable patients in our care. So just going to add a bit of commentary. I'll try not to do a ton, but I thought that line was interesting because I mentioned in my book, of course, God is blatantly against abortion. I do talk about do no harm, and um, understand people aren't going to like this crossover too much, but I made the line. I said that harm is now a matter of perspective, and there's so many people who are going forward gung ho with things because it meets their ideology, not because it meets the science or ethical standards at all. It's just so much. This is the way I think the world should be, and so we're going to do it. And a lot of it is ideology. Some of it is political benefits, and some of it's just money. It's always about the money. I think they always say that in Die Hard. Like, um, it's always about the money. But maybe not always. Sometimes about the ideology, and people get stuck on preserving that. But when money backs ideology, and ideology can be lucrative, uh, they mix, and sometimes terrible things can happen because when they do this to children, they do create lifelong clients of big pharma, people who are dependent upon this stuff, in which this article will get into. So yeah, do no harm. It's like that's totally thrown out the window. Today I'm speaking out. I'm doing so knowing how toxic the public conversation is around this highly contentious issue, and the ways that my testimony might be misused. I am doing so knowing that I am putting myself at serious personal and professional risk. I assume she means how her testimony will be used, because she's a very left-wing person, and she understands that the right is going to pounce. And so even at all that risk, professionally and politically, because obviously right-wing people are pouncing, um, she still felt compelled to put this out. Almost everyone in my life advised me to keep my head down, but I cannot in good conscience do so, because what is happening to scores of children is far more important than my comfort, and what is happening to them is morally and medically appalling. Soon after my arrival at the Transgender Center, I was struck by the lack of formal protocols for treatment. The center's physician co-directors were essentially the sole authority. At first, the patient population was tipped toward what used to be the traditional instance of a child with gender dysphoria, a boy often quite young who wanted to present as who wanted to be a girl. Until 2015 or so, a very small number of these boys comprised the population of pediatric gender dysphoria cases. Then, across the Western world, there began to be a dramatic increase in a new population, teenage girls. Many with no previous history of gender distress suddenly declared they were transgender and demanded immediate treatment with testosterone. So this is a bit about like Abigail Schreier wrote a book, Irreversible Damage, when parents reached out to her and wanted someone to look into the social contagion of gender dysphoria. And it is something that's sweeping a lot of young women. There have been stories. I've seen so many stories of young women who have detransitioned, but they self-diagnosed. They got radicalized on things like Tumblr, places like that, where they hear like, oh, maybe I'm this, and they had other sort of issues, whether it was other sort of mental health issues or just internalized misogyny or whatever. They self-diagnose, they get hormones and other things very easily, and then at some point they realize they made a mistake. And she's going to speak to the mistakes that people made, and the harm that was done, and realizing that they've done harm to people. But yeah, this is a recent wave. um I've done a couple videos on Dylan Mulvaney, and someone said, "You're just sounds like you're just a hater." I'm like, I don't hate this man. I hate like the ideology. I hate, that. I mean, he said he wants it to be legal to call him a man, so I mean, I definitely hate that sort of like threat of censorship, and how these people are trying to push this stuff forward. But I think I'm more disgusted with society as a whole. That's like, why are these big organizations and levers of power really, really, really pushing this? And she's gonna get into this article about why she really, really decided to step forward, because someone in our government decided to push propaganda and lies regarding this issue. And that's what made her say, I have to pursue this. So we have a whole system that's dedicated to this ideology, uplifting it, protecting it, plastering it everywhere. And you're not crazy because you notice. I certainly saw this at the center. One of my jobs was to do intake for new patients and their families. When I started, there were probably 10 such calls a month. When I left, there were 50, and about 70% of the new patients were girls. Sometimes clusters of girls arrived from the same high school. This concerned me, but didn't feel I was in the position to sound some kind of alarm back then. There was a team of about 8 of us, and only one other person brought up the kinds of questions I had. Anyone who raised doubts ran the risk of being called a transphobe. The girls who came to us had many comorbidities: depression, anxiety, ADHD, eating disorders, obesity. Many were diagnosed with autism or had autism like symptoms. A report last year on a British pediatric transgender center found that about 1/3 of the patients referred there were on the autism spectrum. Frequently, our patients declared they had disorders that no one believed they had. We had patients who said they had Tourette syndrome, but they didn't. They had tic disorders, but they didn't. They had multiple personalities, but they didn't. The doctors privately recognized these false self diagnoses as a manifestation of social contagion. They even acknowledge that suicide has an element of social contagion. But when I said the clusters of girls streaming into our service looked as if their gender issues might be a manifestation of social contagion, the doctor said gender identity reflected something innate. To begin transitioning, the girls needed a letter of support from a therapist. Let me just interject again. To just highlight that they do treat gender dysphoria today different than they do many other conditions. So it's interesting that she notes that they're willing to say other things have an element to social contagion, but they just want to dismiss that gender identity has an element to it. To begin transitioning, the girls needed a letter of support from a therapist, usually one we recommended, who they had to see only once or twice for the green light. To make it more efficient for the therapist, we offered them a template for how to write a letter in support of transition. The next stop was a single visit to an endocrinologist for a testosterone prescription. That's all it took. When a female takes testosterone, the profound and permanent effects of the hormone can be seen in a matter of months. Voices drop, beards sprout, body fat is redistributed, sexual interest explodes, aggression increases, and the mood can be unpredictable. Another thing I heard, testosterone will like help. Women are just having naturally more anxiety than I guess men do, and with that testosterone, it alleviates some of that. So a lot of people, when they get on those hormones, they'll feel like, they're doing great. They're doing pretty good, especially with the anxiety lesson. But that doesn't mean that there's not something wrong transforming in your body, even though they might have that high of not feeling just female anxiety, I guess. And I'm not saying all women have anxiety. Some women definitely have it more than others. Um, and I'm not saying that men don't have it either. I'm just adding that tidbit. Our patients were told about some side effects, including sterility. But after working at the center, I came to believe that teenagers are simply not capable of fully grasping what it means to make the decision to become infertile while still a minor. Which people don't give hysterectomies to women unless they're like upper in age or have had a couple kids, because of complications or whatever that might occur. But they also don't want women to regret or have, let's say, be upset that they can't have kids. Someone was complaining to me about it today, and they're like, instead of fighting for abortion, why don't you fight for, women be able to get hysterectomies? I'm like, doctors have free will. What do you want me to do about that? Because doctors aren't your slaves. Like, you can advocate why you feel like you're able to have that, but I can't. What do you want me to do? Petition the government and make the doctors do it? I don't think that's ethical. People can disagree with that, but I just don't. They're not your slaves. They're there to do a job, to do no harm, and if they don't feel that's the right thing to do, and especially if it's elective like that, I don't know what else you want me to do about it. So, many encounters with the patients emphasized to me how little these young people understood the profound impacts changing gender would have on their bodies and minds. But the center downplayed the negative consequences and emphasized the need for transition. As the center's website said, left untreated, gender dysphoria has any number of consequences, from self harm to suicide. But when you take away the gender dysphoria by allowing a child to be who he or she is, we're noticing that goes away. The studies we have show these kids often wind up functioning uh, psych- psychosocially as well as better than their peers. There are no reliable studies showing this. Indeed, the experiences of many of the center's patients prove how false these assertions are. So they're not well adjusted or better adjusted when they go through this process. So noting that there's some propaganda associated with this. Here's an example. On Friday, May 1st, 2020, a colleague emailed me about a 15-year-old male patient. Oh dear, I'm concerned that the patient does not understand what bical- bicalcitonide does. I responded, I don't think that we start anything honestly right now. It's a medication used to treat metastatic prostate cancer, and as one of its side effects is that it feminizes the bodies of men who take it, including the appearance of breasts. The center prescribed this cancer drug as a puberty blocker and feminizing agent for boys. As with most cancer drugs, bicalcitonide, did not say that right, but we'll keep going, has a long list of side effects, and this patient experienced one of them, liver toxicity. He was sent to another unit of the hospital for evaluation and immediately taken off the drug. Afterward, his mother sent an electronic message to the transgender center saying that we are lucky her family was not the type to sue. How little patients understood what they were getting into was illustrated by a call. I can't imagine. Maybe they knew that it wasn't going anywhere, but somebody doing that to your kids. So um, that's awful. But there's other things. How little patients understood what they were getting into was illustrated by a call we received at a center in 2020 from a 17-year-old biological female patient who was on testosterone. She said she was bleeding from the vagina. In less than an hour, she had soaked through an extra heavy pad, her jeans, and a towel she had wrapped around her waist, and the nurse at the center told her to go to the emergency room right away. We found out later this girl had intercourse, and because testosterone thins the vaginal tissues, her vaginal canal had ripped open. She had to be sedated and given surgery to repair the damage. She wasn't the only vaginal laceration case we heard about. I think that's when my mouth dropped. The other girls were disturbed by the effects of testosterone on their clitoris, which enlarges and grows into what looks like a microphallus or tiny penis. I counseled one patient whose enlarged clitoris now extended below her vulva, and it chafed and rubbed painfully in her jeans. I advised her to get the kind of compression undergarments worn by biological men who dress to pass as female. At the end of the call, I thought to myself, wow, we hurt this kid. There are rare conditions in which babies are born with atypical genitalia, cases that call for sophisticated care and compassion, but clinics like the one where I worked are creating a whole cohort of kids with atypical genitals, and most of these teens haven't even had sex yet. They had no idea who they were going to be as adults, yet all it took for them to permanently transform themselves was one or two short conversations with a therapist. Being put on powerful doses of testosterone or estrogen, enough to try to trick your body into mimicking the opposite sex, affects the rest of the body. I doubt that any parent who's ever consented to give their kid testosterone, a lifelong treatment, knows that they're also possibly signing their kid up for blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication, and perhaps sleep apnea and diabetes. But sometimes the parents' understanding of what they had agreed to do to their children came forcefully. Please be advised that I'm revoking my consent for this course of medical treatment. Grades have dropped. There have been an inpatient behavioral health visit, and now he's on 5 different medications: Lexapro, Trazodone, Buspar, etc., etc. Blank is a shell of his former self, riddled with anxiety. Who knows if it's because the hormone blockers or the other medications? I revoke my consent. I want the hormone blocker removed. Thank you. Yeah, so some very tragic stuff here. Besides teenage girls, another group was referred to us: young people from the inpatient psychiatric unit or the emergency department of St. Louis Children's Hospital. The mental health of these kids was deeply concerning. There were diagnoses like schizophrenia, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and more. Often they were already on a fistful of pharmaceuticals. This was tragic, but unsurprising given the profound trauma some had been through. Yet, no matter how much suffering or pain a child had endured, or how little treatment and love they had received, our doctors viewed gendered transition, even with all the expense and hardship it entailed, as the solution. Some weeks it felt as though almost our entire caseload was nothing but disturbed young people. For example, one teenager came to us in the summer of 2022 when he was 17 years old and living in a lockdown facility because he had been sexually abusing dogs. He had an awful childhood. His mother was a drug addict, his father was imprisoned, and he grew up in foster care. Whatever treatment he may have been getting, it wasn't working. During our intake, I learned from another caseworker that when he got out, he planned to reoffend because he believed dogs had willingly submitted. Somewhere along the way, he expressed a desire to become female, so he ended up being seen at our center. From there, he went on to a psychologist at the hospital who was known for to approve virtually everyone seeking transition. Then our doctor recommended feminizing hormones. At the time, I wondered if this was being done as a form of chemical castration. That thought came up again with another case. This one was in spring of 2022 and concerned a young man who had intense obsessive compulsive disorder that manifested as a desire to cut off his penis after he masturbated. This patient expressed no gender dysphoria, but he got hormone. I asked the doctor what protocol he was following, but I never got a straight answer. Another disturbing aspect of the center was its lack of regard for the rights of parents and the extent to which doctors saw themselves as more informed decision makers over the fate of these children. In Missouri, only one parent, and this is getting to like, I've heard stories of this before. I've reported stories like this before. This is something that people need to be concerned about when there's people in like higher sort of authorities or whatever that believe that they have more say over your kids, want control over your kids, and this particular ideology will use to pry you from your kids. So we'll keep reading. In Missouri, only one parent's consent is required for treatment of their child. But when there was a dispute between the parents, it seemed the center always took the side of the affirming parent. My concerns about this approach to dissenting parents grew in 2019 when one of our doctors actually testified in a custody hearing against a father who opposed a mother's wish to start their on puberty blockers. I had done the original intake call, and I found the mother quite disturbing. She and the father were getting divorced, and the mother described the daughter as kind of a tomboy. So now the mother was convinced her child was trans. But when I asked her if her daughter had adopted a boy's name, she was if she was distressed about her body, if she was saying she felt like a boy, the mother said no. I explained the girl just didn't meet the criteria. A month later, the mother called back and said her daughter now used a boy's name, was in distress over her body, and wanted to transition. This time, the mom and daughter were given an appointment. Our providers decided the girl was trans and prescribed a puberty blocker to prevent her from her normal development. The father adamantly disagreed, said this was all coming from the mother, and a custody battle ensued after the hearing where our doctor testified in favor of transition. The judge sided with the mother. Um, and here's an email from Jamie. I was thanks. I was not having any issues interpreting or understanding the elements that she on below, looking for the bigger question about how consent is now being determined. My concerns are that the judge is essentially removing the element of parental consent and placing it in our hands. The judge could have awarded the medical decision making to the dad or awarded legal custody to the dad. Instead, the judge put in the center's hands the decision making for medical transition, and this is a patient who is not yet 16. So if anyone's been following me for a while, you know I'm from Michigan, and we had an election that did not go well for us at all. Like Florida banger for Republicans. It was a wipeout for us, but we had a ballot initiative, and it was really worded deceptively. I knew, and I was telling people, if people aren't aware of this before the ballot, like they go vote, they're going to vote for this. But if we can inform them prior, then we can stop this. So people started to. So the gist of it was that it gives every individual, doesn't say woman, every individual, and it doesn't specify the age, the rights to all matters regarding pregnancy. It was called Reproductive Freedom for All Act, and they listed so much. They listed abortion, they listed miscarriage management, but they also listed hysterect different stuff that could they listed sterilization, but they said it's not limited to the things that they listed. So there's more things that they just didn't list. So it changes our constitution. So we have not limited. So there's a very open door with what could be involved. Anything related to matters related to pregnancy. And it was really concerning too, because I'm like, how do you get pregnant? How do you get pregnant? Like, let's think about it for a second, and then I'm on to the question. The answer is sex. You get pregnant with sex. So if it's all matters relating to pregnancy, how is not also relating to sex? So there's nothing in the constitutional amendment, and it has passed now, about needing parental consent regarding any of the stuff. And it does say that you can make laws regarding this stuff, but it has to meet 3 different criteria, and one of them is that it can't infringe on the individual's autonomous decision making. So that basically wipes out or could wipe out just about any law. It has to be aligned with medical standards. And I can't remember the other one off the top of my head, but um well, basically those, with the one you could wipe up most stuff, but if you have a really woke standards, like standards set by who, these different transgender organizations, these clinics that are butchering these kids, these standards of Planned Parenthood, who've been working for a long time to get rid of parental consent. They already tried to pass two bills. The Democrats in the House already tried to pass two bills to strip parents of their parental rights. If you go to the ACLU's website or Planned Parenthood advocacy group of Michigan or whatever it is, they tell you that they don't want parental consent for children when they get things like abortion. They think it's safer for the children to be able to act privately. And when people are like, this is going to lead to stuff happening without parental consent, they're like, that's not true. That's not true. They even brought uh the prosecutor of Detroit, Genesee, and Flint to be like, they're lying about proposal 3. And they were lying, which I tried to follow up and question them. They did they would not get back with me because I did challenge them on it. And I did videos addressing it, debunking it, going through the law. There's other, like, people who are far better versed in the law than I am who laid it out very well. So people are like, well, there's other laws on the books. It says on the ballot that any conflicting law will be overwritten or cited or whatever. So, but it didn't even tell you that the right was for every individual on the ballot. So it was really disgusting what happened. It did pass. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that there's probably going to be a lot of people harmed before something like that gets overturned. People want darkness, they get darkness. So I was really concerned in telling different stories about parents who lost custody of their children over gender identity stuff, because, and not just conservative right-wing parents, like left-wing parents have lost custodies of their daughter. There was one woman from Illinois, and she's a feminist, she's left-wing. Her husband she had custody of her daughter. She had custody, and she had her daughter go over for a visit. And then the next thing she knows, it's like, oh, she can't come back home with you. You're an unsafe. And her daughter, she wasn't really trans or wasn't really expressing stuff. And she's very feminine. But her ex-husband married somebody who was into like psychotherapy. And they said a lot of the stuff was coming from, the new mom. And next thing you know, she lost custody of her daughter, and she can only write her letters. She can't even like call her. So it's a very tragic story. And I'm concerned. I'm concerned that stuff can continue to explode in Michigan, especially since they just changed our constitution. If we don't open our eyes and scream to the rooftops about some of this craziness going on. So I'm very glad that the story came out. When people are like, mind your business about a lot of this like transgender ideology, there's a lot of people who want to just be left alone and live their life. And there's people who want to start like a cultural revolutions, and and then our society raises them up. And then people see people like Ellen Page, and they're like, oh, she came out and she's been like, I'm like that too. And it just spreads from one person to another. This is not like a natural phenomenon in nature. And according to this case, it sounds like this is something a parent pressed so they could win custody of their kid. How much of a psychotic narcissist do you have to be to put your child in that much and to cause that harm to a father? Because I was the main intake person, I had the broadest perspective on our existing and prospective patients. In 2019, a new group of people appeared on my radar: desisters and detransitioners. Desisters chose not to go through with the transition. Detransitioners are transgender people who decide to return to their birth gender. The one colleague with whom I was able to share my concerns agreed with me that we should be tracking desistance and detransition. We thought the doctors would want to collect and understand this data in order to figure out what they had missed. We were wrong. One doctor wondered aloud, spend time on someone who was no longer his patient. But we created a document anyway and called it the red flag list. It was an Excel spreadsheet that tracked the kind of patients that kept my colleague and me up at night. One of the saddest cases of detransition I witnessed was a teenage girl who, like so many of these, came from an unstable family, was in an uncertain living situation, and had drug use. The overwhelming majority of our patients are white, which I'm I guess I figured that, but this girl was black. She was put on hormones at the center when she was around 16. When she was 18, she went in for a double mastectomy, what's known as top surgery. 3 months later, she called the surgeon's office to say she was going back to her birth name and that her pronouns were she and her. Heartbreakingly, she told the nurse, "I want my breasts back." The surgeon's office contacted our office because they didn't know what to say to this girl. My colleague and I said that we would reach out. It took a while to track her down, and when we did, we made sure that she was in decent mental health, that she was not actively suicidal, that she was not using substances. The last I heard, she was pregnant. Of course, she'll never be able to breastfeed her child. My concerns about what was going on at the center started to overtake my life. By spring of 2020, I felt a medical and moral obligation to do something. So I spoke up in the office and sent plenty of emails. So God bless her, at least for this. Here's just one example. On January 6, 2022, I received an email from a staff therapist asking me for help with a case of a 16-year-old transgender male living in another state. Parents are open to having patients see a therapist, but are not supportive of gender, and patient does not want parents to be aware of gender identity. I am having a challenging time finding a gender affirming therapist. I replied, I do not ethically agree with linking a minor patient to a therapist who would be gender affirming with gender as a focus of their work without that being discussed with the parents and the parent agreeing to that kind of care. In all my years at the Washington University School of Medicine, I had received solidly positive performance reviews. But in 2021, that changed. I got a below average mark for my judgment and working relationships slash cooperative spirit. Although I was described as responsible, conscientious, hardworking, and productive, the evaluation also noted at times Jamie responds poorly to direction from management with defensiveness and hostility. Things came to a head at a half day retreat in summer of 2022. In front of the team, the doctor said that my colleague and I had to stop questioning the medicine and the science as well as their authority. Then an administrator told us we had to get on board or get out. It became clear that the purpose of the retreat was to deliver these messages to us. Can you imagine going on a like a retreat and it's just a struggle session targeted at you? The Washington University, and by the way, I want to note and just put things in perspective. I don't know how everyone feels about the pandemic and stuff that's happened, but I'm sure you guys recall because you're alive, you're watching, the sort of pressure that was on people: comply or you're killing my grandma, comply, you're killing all these people if you don't comply. That there was a psychology behind it, and people felt like they had to bully other people and were empowered to bully other people. You know, there was such pressure associated with everything. There was a reporter today that came out about masks weren't as effective than as they were letting on. And like there's pressure. I was thinking earlier today about the pressure that people had during 2020 after George Floyd died, and BLM, and how people put it up in the profile, how people gave all this money to Black Lives Matter, how people changed their profile to a black square. I never did any of that stuff. I felt like I was living in the twilight zone, and there were so few people willing to just try to keep things in perspective and let the world be normal. I mean, people, like there was one woman who told me, like I was complaining about black neighborhoods being burned down, and they told me that was like acceptable collateral damage. And then I like was like, what? And then she ended up deleting her post, and then she messaged me, and this is a white person talking to me, and she apologized, not because what she said was like totally like evil, but because she realized as a white person, she just didn't she didn't have the place to speak about what she was saying. And I was like, "Sweetheart, I want you to be able to speak, but like I just want you to realize, I just want you to get some perspective on what you're saying. Like I'm challenging you not because you're white, I'm challenging you because you're wrong." And but I don't want you to not speak, especially just because you're white. I'm like, that's not what I want. But she didn't reply back. I suppose she was really embarrassed or whatever. But the people are afraid to be calling racist. People are afraid from all sorts of different pressures. And people are afraid today to be called homophobic. People are afraid to be called transphobe or whatever. So imagine the sort of pressures that are going on in these medical industries with people who just want them to shut up and go forward. When you start doing like the psychological damage, especially when they also throw at you, you have to affirm or they're going to unalive themselves. That's what they say. So there's all this emotional blackmail into these professions. So when people bring up the stuff, you got to know that there's a game that so many people are playing, experimenting on these kids. Like as I'm reading this, I'm thinking about like the Tuskegee experiment, and I'm like, you got to be careful about people who say they care about you, people who are treating you like you got to be so careful about stuff. And they're experimenting on these kids and young women, whether it's for ideology or profit or politics, whatever the reason, it's wrong. The Washington University system provides a generous college tuition payment program for longstanding employees. I live by my paycheck and I have no money to put aside for 5 college tuitions for my kids. I had to keep my job. I also feel a lot of loyalty to Washington University, but I decided then that that I had to get out of transgender center, and to do so, I had to keep my head down and improve my next performance review. I managed to get a decent evaluation and I landed a job conducting research in another part of the Washington University School of Medicine. I gave my notice and left the transgender center in November of 2022. For a couple of weeks, I tried to put everything behind me and settle into my new job as a clinical research coordinator, managing studies regarding children undergoing bone marrow transplants. Then I came across comments from Dr. Rachel Levine, a transgender woman who is a high official at the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. The article read, Levine, U.S. Assistant Secretary of Health, said that clinics are proceeding carefully and that no American children are receiving drugs or hormones for gender dysphoria who shouldn't. I felt stunned and sickened. It wasn't true. And I know that from deep firsthand experience. So I started writing down everything I could about my experience at the Transgender Center 2 weeks ago. I brought my concerns and documents to the attention of Missouri's Attorney General. He is a Republican. I am a progressive. But the safety of children should not be a matter for our culture wars. Given the secrecy and lack of rigorous standards that characterize youth gender transition across the country, I believe that to ensure the safety of American children, we need a moratorium on the hormonal and surgical treatment of young people with gender dysphoria. In the past 15 years, according to Reuters, the US has gone from having no pediatric gender clinics to more than 100. A thorough analysis should be undertaken to find out what has been done to their patients and why, and what the long term consequences are. There is a clear path for us to follow. Just last year, England announced that it would close the Tavistock's Youth Gender Clinic and the NHS's only such clinic in the country after an investigation revealed shoddy practices and poor patient treatment. Sweden and Finland, too, have investigated pediatric transition and greatly curbed the practice, finding there is insufficient evidence of help and danger of great harm. Some critics describe the kind of treatment offered at places like the Transgender Center where I worked as a kind of national experiment, but that's wrong. Experiments are supposed to be carefully designed, hypotheses are supposed to be tested ethically. The doctors I worked alongside at the transgender center said frequently about the treatment of our patients. We are building the plane while we are flying it. No one should be a passenger on that kind of aircraft. And that's the end. So as I noted earlier, Rachel Levine, who's the assistant health secretary, U.S. assistant health secretary, who by the way is a diversity hire, just is. I don't know why you would hire him after COVID, what he did in his state, but he ended up being the assistant health secretary, so they could say, "Oh, our first transgender person we elevated to this place." That was the goal of that. And Bucera, who's the health secretary, he doesn't have the background to have the job that he has. The most prominent thing that he's done is sue the Little Sisters of the Poor. Or people will say, well, he didn't directly sue the nuns. He sued the Trump administration. Yeah, but the Trump administration was protecting the Little Sisters of the Poor. So yeah, he sued the nuns. So he shouldn't have that position, and Levin shouldn't have the position. And Levin is the person who Babylon B did an article calling him Man of the Year, and then Twitter locked out their account. And then they're like, well, we're not deleting it, because they're like, you have to delete it and you can get your account back. And they're like, it's true. So we're not, he's a man and we're not deleting it. So they didn't delete it. And Elon Musk didn't like that they locked their account. And that's why Elon Musk, I don't know what all contributed to it, but that started the avalanche of Elon Musk eventually owning Twitter. So yeah, wild stuff. So we don't know what all is happening across the country at these different clinics. I'm very grateful for this article that she was willing to write this. Um, there's so many people who are not okay, who are so deep in this ideology, and they get treated so fast. Um, so fast. Detransitioners talk about how they have like a 30-minute conversation with Planned Parenthood, and then they can get hormones. So people are not putting a lot of care into these people. Gender dysphoria, it's not it is a trend, I guess, but people keep elevating it, talking about it, because they're like, well, these people shouldn't be marginalized or treated. I don't want anyone treated poorly or anything like that. I don't. But there's some things that you gatekeep, and there's a huge element of social contagion here. There's a huge element of social contagion. We wouldn't uplift anorexia or things like that to be like, this is a wonderful thing, celebrate these people going through this thing. We should not treat people poorly who go through those sorts of things, and let, as a society, be there for them as we comfort them and try to help them get right with their mind and their body. But to act like, I don't know, this is some kind of moral heroic thing, whether it's Dylan Mulvaney or Leah Thomas or something, uplifting them, even to the point where uplifting them and their needs and their feelings above women, it's just beyond me. It's just really insane. And ideology, money, and politics. Politics plays a huge part of it. But there's some individuals who are really shady with how they're using their dysphoria to gain attention, etc. But as a society as a whole, like these big levers of power that keep elevating it, as if it's this glorious, stunning thing that's contributing to the contagion, because people don't have to go to the dark, deep corners of Reddit or Tumblr, rather, to be radicalized in this. They can just turn on their TV. And if you say anything like, no, I'm not cis, I'm just a woman, I'm not a chest feeder, people get mad at you. I heard someone today say, just be an ally. Like, it's not a big deal what woman is. And I'm like, what? And they're like, you should be able to empathize that they want their own space and we should have their own space. And they're like, just be an ally. And I'm like, I can't be an ally to an ideology that is adversarial to the truth. I can't, like, I can advocate for people that they get treatment and proper treatment and help and sympathy and care, and that their rights aren't violated, like real rights, not privileges that they feel that they're entitled to. I can do those things, but if allyship means that I have to somehow accept that being a man or a woman is interchangeable, be, then I can't do that. Like people say, no, they're not trying to take womanhood away from you. I think to a degree they are trying. That's something that you can't do. I'll always be a woman. I'll always be a woman. There's something you can't take that away, you know. But at the same time, if you're trying to say that you can, that there's not male and female, that you can become one or the other, especially based off of belief, then how does that not diminish what men and women are if they are so easily interchangeable? And to me, it seems pretty obvious that people don't want to really have a third category. Maybe some people do, but like in the What is a Woman documentary, what Matt Walsh went to one, transgender person doctor, and he's like, I'm a woman, and he didn't even consider himself as trans. He's like, I live my life as a woman. I am a woman, and there'd be people be like, well, you need to respect that. Like, well, I mean, he's a man though. Like he's had surgery, and lives how he wants to live, wears the clothes, etc. But he's still not a woman, you know. And if someone passes and has presented themselves in a way that you wouldn't be able to tell, I guess congrats to them. But if you expect everyone to just accept like they're interchangeable, I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do that. So I can't be an ally in that sort of way. And I don't think anyone else should. I don't think I think we need to have a hard 180-degree turn from this ideology. And I'm sure I'm into some stuff that's way harder than the author of the article, because she said that she's married to a trans man, so she's a lesbian. So she's understands that ideology and accepts it and stuff, but and I'm not denying anyone has gender dysphoria. People obviously have gender dysphoria. um but I don't think that we should do the respecting people's pronouns or something. I think we got to say, look, this is truth, this is reality, and it's worth fighting for, because look how it has evolved into the harm. I'm very grateful to everybody who's willing to ally in the position of helping kids and young women. And by the way, even it's not just minors who are like in danger of this. As I mentioned hysterectomies earlier, like they won't just give that to young women. I guess you can find someone to do it, but it's not like typical. Like there's plenty of doctors who don't like to do it because they don't, because of repercussions that can happen with women physically, and also they might want a baby. They might regret it. So if we pause with women doing that, then why are we doing this to kids or young women like in their who are 18, 19, 20, your brain is it doesn't stop developing into your 20s. If I see really bad takes in my comments on TikTok, I'm like, this person is between the ages of 15 and 21 or 20. Sometimes I go up to 23. I'm like, but I can usually nail their age. I'm like, this person's like 17. And I go to their profile. I'm like, yep, I knew it. And I'm not saying all kids were dumb. I would, I mean, I don't like, I bet I have better takes than I did as a kid, but I definitely had better takes than the kids that I see today. So I'm not saying every kid has a bad take, but I'm usually right. I'm usually right. So why when a child says, hey, I would like you to give me hormones to chop off my bosoms, that we just go along with that, like that's normal, like that's okay, like they're totally rational enough to make that decision, that they understand the real world problems that will happen as a result of that. That's insane. The person who worked with Sam Smith, was it Petra or something? I don't know. But for the song Unholy, everyone's talking about the performance or whatever, but he had him accept the award, and because they wanted a transgender person to be like, I'm the first transgender person to win this award and stuff. And Matt Walsh pointed out Like this, people say that they don't have these big surgeries on minors. And granted, I don't believe this person is American, but like this person had surgery when they were 16. So Matt Walsh was pointing out this thing, like this happens to kids, and then people started attacking Matt Walsh, like, but she's happy, she's happy. That's what We'll just admit that he's right. Just admit that he's right. Admit that he has a point. You can say, well, you have a point, but we believe that they should. Let's just be frank. Let's be for real. Like if you believe that minors should be able to do this stuff, and frankly, there's a lot of people who do. There's people who believe that parents are obstacles, that the kids are dollar signs, and the parents just need to be pushed out of it. They prefer if the kids were just, wards of the state anyway, with education, all sorts of stuff. There are people who want this done to kids. So I am grateful to everyone, regardless of if you share my political worldview, if you're willing to fight side by side with this issue, especially knowing that I'm going to go further than where you're going to go. But I very much appreciate you meeting me in the middle, at least with stop doing this to young kids and young adults. I don't know how everybody feels about the young adults. And then you'll see these heartbreaking stories of people who are detransitioners pouring out their hearts. And there are people who be like, well, you're an adult. So you were an adult when you made that choice and you have to live with it. Yeah, obviously, they have to live with it. But to pretend like there wasn't some sort of, there wasn't propaganda and malpractice and other things done to them, that somebody should be held accountable as well. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. So grateful for this article.
Thank you for watching my video. Make sure you go to blacktnews.com and check out different articles, different videos, and also check out our merchandise. If you like what I do, you can also support at the website on the donate page. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and also that notification bell. God bless.